Hello and welcome to our channel, where we provide a summary and more related content of the linguistics research seminars hosted by Universidad de Salamanca and Universidad de Valladolid. On October 20th, 2023, we had the pleasure of having Professor Patrick Honeybone from the University of Edinburgh join us to share his talk titled Can Dialect Writing Spell Phonological Dialect Features? Did you miss it? Don't worry. Here you shall find key concepts and essential aspects introduced by Professor Honeybone during his session. While Professor Honeybone's talk also considered the difficulty of thinking about whether dialect writing can spell phonological features, he broke down his presentation into the following questions. What is dialect writing? What are dialect features? What kind of respellings exist in dialect writing text? Can dialect writing spell phonological features? We must begin by considering how we define dialect writing. This is a cover term which, according to Honeybone and Maguire, intends to represent a non-standard dialect in written form, at least to some degree and in some portion of a text. Thus, Professor Honeybone highlights the importance of focusing on dialect writing, since this immensely complex phenomenon can give insights into the features of a variety, such as dialect features, which is the same thing as sociolinguistic variables. However, to understand this notion fully, we must put together our sociolinguistic, dialectological, and structural linguistic acuity. Dialect writing engages with multiple types of variation. Variation in terms of the many types and purposes as well as the genres of the text. Variation between text, even within the same genre. Variation within a text in terms of how or whether dialect features are represented. Since there is a vast range of types of dialect writing, we must familiarize ourselves with a dichotomy presented by Shorrocks, who distinguishes between literary dialect and dialect literature. The former refers to non-standard forms which are used only in direct speech, while the surrounding text is in standard English. The texts are intended for a wide audience and general readership to be sold throughout the English-speaking world. The latter addresses non-standard forms which may be expected throughout the text. The works are intended for speakers of the dialect that is represented. However, Professor Honeybone prescribes precaution. Whereas dialect writing comprises both types, this distinction does not account for everything. These categories point to prototypes on two lines. What is the intended audience? What proportion of that text is non-standard? These ideas are shared with Professor Warren Maguire, who together with Professor Honeybone brings forward the existence of a dialect writing space, within which text or part of text can be situated. This allows us to bear other parameters in mind to refine our analysis. Is the text edited? What is the purpose of a text? Is the writer-speaker of the dialect represented? Do they care about the dialect? With these distinctions in mind, what can we expect in terms of representation of dialect features in different kind of texts? Considering all this, we must ask ourselves now, what are dialect features? In the book he co-authored with Professor Maguire, Dialect Writing at the North of England, Professor Honeybone addresses this question. A specific structural characteristic of language where a particular non-standard dialect differs from a standard or reference variety. In what follows, I talk of a standard English, STE, when referring to morphology, lexis or syntax, and reference English, or Ref-E, when referring to phonology, on the assumption that there is not really a standard pronunciation. To most intents and purposes, Ref-E is something like RP. Defined in this way, many features of a particular dialect will be shared widely with many other dialects. Only a few are fundamentally unique to one dialect area, but that does not mean that they are not dialect features of the particular dialect under consideration. For example, Just because LE shares an absence of a foot strut split with other dialects from the north of England does not mean that the absence of a foot strut split is not a dialect feature of LE. On the other hand, dialect features which are not shared with other varieties, such as the widespread deletion of stops in LE, for example, might be expected to differ in the extent to which they are salient to speakers. Lexical sets work as models for standard pronunciation. They enable one to refer concisely to large groups of words which tend to share the same vowel and to the vowel which they share. In this sense, this set of words share a common phonological history and work well for modern dialects, allowing us to recognize and describe dialect features. Now that we are acquainted with the definitions of dialect writing and dialect features, what kind of respellings exist in dialect writing? Professor Honeybone indicates we may find two distinct types. Dialectally motivated respellings, which are intended to draw the reader's attention to the fact that a word has a different phonological form in the dialect being represented than in reference English. These are relevant to spelling dialect features. Non-dialectally motivated respellings, which are surprisingly common, also called I-dialect. They consist in words or group of words which have been spelled in a way which to the eye is recognizably non-standard, but which to the ear still indicates a pronunciation that is standard. Here you can observe an example of how both types of respellings can be located in a piece of dialect writing called Scouse Interpretation of Alice in Wonderland, which attempts to translate Lewis Carroll's celebrated tale into the dialect of Liverpool Scouse. As you can see, all dialectally motivated features are colored red, while those which are non-dialectally motivated and therefore do not contribute to revealing dialect features are colored blue. But then, can dialect writing spell phonological features? The straightforward answer is yes, they can, and what's more, if we focus on non-I-dialect respellings using a quantitative methodology, we can understand aspects of the patterning of dialect features. Furthermore, we could approach these spelling variants as analogous to the variants of sociolinguistic variables, in line with Labov's 1972 principle of accountability, where we must count whether a word is respelled from the standard and how often the same feature is not respelled. To wrap things up, Professor Honeybone tells us that yes, dialect writing can spell phonological dialect features, but there are some caveats. There is vast variation between different types of dialect writing texts. Some kinds of dialect writing do not aim to represent authentic dialect features. Others very much care about spelling the dialect features of the variety that they represent. Some kinds of respellings are not intended to represent dialect features. Some dialect features are more salient and may be respelled more often. I-dialect respellings do not represent dialect features. That would be all for today. We hope you have enjoyed this video. Do not forget to subscribe to this channel if you wish to stay updated on the latest content from the Linguistics Research Seminars. Thank you for watching.